Hello everybody, Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw, and this is Monday. On Mondays, we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays, we wear pink.
Oh my god, she's so annoying.
Who is?
Who's this?
Gretchen?
Right. Hold on. Oh my god, she's so annoying.
I know, just get rid of her.
Today, I am live with my Twitch chat and my TikTok chat as we are discussing the most overrated and underrated Pokemon inside of Pokemon Unite in today's overrated, underrated tier list, or underrated, overrated, depending on which one I decide to title this video. Let's take a look at our tiers right here. We have our God tier overrated. This is the most overrated Pokemon in the game. We have our overrated. Felt pretty good about that when I was typing it out, Rayquaza. We have our B tier. Yeah. So, still got the B tier, and I'm not even clear how it could be used in this list. Underrated tiers. These are Pokemon that are underrated inside the meta, and then our Decidueye Memorial tier, underrated. This actually is a good category, finally. This is the most underrated Pokemon. So, there we go. Let's start this thing off. Where do we want to even begin? Let's pick something that I think is overrated inside the game. What's something that's overrated that a lot of people are like, this is good, and I'm like, all right, chill it out. What needs to chill out a little? You know what? Here's one. Gengar. Now, I know a lot of players would say that they don't think Gengar is extremely good, but every time I bring up Gengar not being that good in this meta, I always have people arguing with me that Gengar is so good, it one-shots you, it's all this stuff. It really is not that great of a Pokemon. It's pretty rough, especially into a lot of these tanky Pokemon that are inside the meta right now. I think Gengar is quite overrated. I don't think it's really great at all inside this meta. From the chat, is Crustle overrated? I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so. Let's keep going with our speedsters for now. Okay, Absol, underrated. I think Absol does not get much love. I do think, very similar to Gengar, it does struggle a little bit inside of this meta, but at the same time, I feel like people completely write Absol off at this point, and I actually don't think it's that bad of a Pokemon. I don't think it's doing amazing or anything like that, but I think Absol's actually doing better than people say or than people play, I guess I will say. So I would say Absol is an underrated Pokemon inside this meta. Let's see. Another speedster. Talon. Talon. Talon is simultaneously overrated and underrated. I would say Talon is underrated, but not by much. This is a close one. Talon is one of those Pokemon that also people like to argue a little bit for. I don't think I can really rest this into the B tier. I do think it's underrated. A lot of the chat's thinking B tier right now. Maybe we move it to the B tier, but right now I do think Talon is a little underrated. The thing about Talon is it's hard to play well, and I think if people played it well, it would probably be rated accurately, but people play it so poorly. Dodrio, I would say, is B tier with a bullet. Dodrio, I feel like, is accurately rated as one of the best Pokemon inside the game, but not... I don't think anyone talks about Dodrio like, it's awful, or people don't talk about it like, you can't win against... Like, people are like, no, it's really good, and I think everyone kind of recognizes that Dodrio is a very solid Pokemon. I don't know too many people who would think that this Pokemon is not good. So, yeah. Zeraora is... What do I do with Zeraora? It's kind of underrated, and it's kind of bad. I would say, it's kind of underrated, but it really does need some help. It's definitely not overrated. Well, dang. I don't hear many people defend this Pokemon. You think overrated too many in solo queue? Dang, I really am not sure where to put Zeraora right now. I'm not sure where to put it. Matt Reed says Zeraora's late game is underrated. I'm going to put it B. I think most people recognize this Pokemon's not great. but it's a carry. I think most people recognize this Pokemon's not great. Zoroark, I think, is also B tier. I think Zoroark is widely regarded as very, very good, and I think it's very, very good. I don't think people are off at all about Zoroark. I think Zoroark's just extremely good. And maybe loses some value in certain comps, but in general, I think Zoroark is crushing it, and I think most people recognize it's crushing it. We can talk about Scyther. You know what? This might be a nice one for underrated. I think Scyther is actually pretty decent, and it just kind of fell off. It fell out of people's minds a little bit because it was bugged for a bit, but I would say that Scyther is a little underrated. The biggest issue with Scyther is it got some nerfs, and it's not Dodrio and it's not Zeraora, but I would say Scyther is actually underrated, and some people could probably give it another look or two because it doesn't do too bad. Now the question is, do we move into our all-rounders? Do we move into our... You know what? Someone was talking about Crustle. Let's move into our defenders. I would say Crustle is underrated. I'm not saying it's great. I just think people really, really... The level at which people talk about Crustle could be saved for other Pokemon. It really could. So I think Crustle is relatively underrated. I think if people understood how it's... Because I've heard people say its Unite move is bad. It's got an amazing Unite move. Its Rock Tomb is good. Stealth Rocks is kind of a little cheese at this point, but I actually think Crustle is relatively underrated inside the game. That being said, it's definitely not the best. We can all recognize that. Snorlax. This might be controversial. I think Snorlax is a little overrated, honestly. I think the thing with Snorlax is there are other defenders that I think are just better than it, and it kind of holds that spot in the game as one of the like all-time tanks. But I think right now there are just better defenders inside the game. From the chat, Flaillox is the most underrated. Interesting. Interesting. You think Snorlax is B? Interesting. I think it's overrated, honestly. It's not bad. It's definitely not bad, but I think Slowbro, Trevenant, Lapras, all better than Snorlax. I just think it's in a weird spot, I guess, you know? That's what I think. So, and I think people talk about it like it's still like one of the higher up defenders, and sometimes I would even say the same thing, but I honestly think it might be a little overrated. It's interesting that the chat's think it's underrated. Interesting. Rarely anyone uses it, and it's decent. Okay. All right. I mean, I'll give it to the chat here that they're thinking underrated for this Pokemon. I'm going to move it down to underrated because we have so many people saying it. I would love to hear from you in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, what you think about the chat moving that down to underrated. I think this is going to be, I think we could have a lot of great discussion around a tier list like this. Let's see, our next defender. Blastoise, I think, is probably accurately rated. Maybe, is Blastoise a little underrated? I don't know. I think Blastoise is good. I don't think people think it's, I don't hear people say it's bad. And I don't hear people say it's the best thing in the game. I think he's good, and I think a lot of people think he's good. I would lean towards underrated as opposed to overrated, I think. That's what I would lean to. I'm going to put it in B tier right now. I think it's good, and I think most people think it's pretty good, too. Let's see. I'm going to skip Wiggly for now. Slowbro, I don't think is overrated at all. I think it's very accurately rated. It's very good. It's extremely good. Everyone knows it's one of the best defenders in the game. I think everyone... I don't think there's anyone who thinks this Pokemon is overrated or underrated. I mean, it's just so good. It's so good. Mamoswine, underrated in my opinion. I think Mamoswine is underrated. I think what happened with Mamoswine is that there are just other defenders that are better, and Mamoswine completely fell out of people's minds. But I do think Mamo is an underrated Pokemon. It's still really good. It's just people don't play it much at all. They've like completely forgotten about Mamo. So I'm definitely gonna throw Mamo into our underrated tier. Overrated? You guys might not like me for this one. Goodra. I think Goodra is overrated. I think people want Goodra to be better than Goodra is. I like Goodra. I still think it's not one of the best defenders in the game. It's not the best at its job, I would say. I think Goodra is quite overrated compared to the others. So I don't think it's bad. I just think it's quite overrated. Pokemon like Trevenant, I think, is B. I think it's accurately rated. I think everyone thinks Trevenant's very good right now. I never hear anyone say Trevenant's bad. It's played competitively. It's played solo all the time. Like B with a bullet. Great. Lapras, same thing. I don't think anyone thinks this Pokemon's bad. Everyone knows Lapras is just a busted Pokemon. From the chat, Trev is overrated. Oh, I don't know. Them's fighting words right there. Really? You think Trevenant's overrated? Man, I think Trevenant, no way. I think this is a top tier pick. It's so good. It's so good. Let's talk about Umbreon. I'm going to give my take on Umbreon right now. I've played a ton of Umbreon, and I was playing it on the PTS earlier. I think Umbreon is underrated right now. I think people are not aware how good this Pokemon is. We saw it a bit on the PTS. I think this thing is going to release and be massive. Like, massive. I think this could be an S tier Pokemon, no joke. So, I honestly think this thing is underrated right now. Underrated. But I could be wrong. Maybe everyone kind of recognizes that it's like so good. I could be wrong, but I think this thing is like so good. So good. Let's see. Now the question. All right, chat. Do you want... Oh, we have Greedent. I would say Greedent's constantly underrated. It's actually one of the more underrated Pokemon in the game. I really think so. I think Greedent's really underrated. It has its issues. I understand why it's underrated. It's a really weird role. But I do think this Pokemon is pretty underrated. It's one of the more underrated ones. Like, as I think about it, it's one of the ones that I honestly see moving towards the Decidueye Memorial tier, which I might do a little bit later, because it's pretty dang underrated, I would say. Now the question is, do you want to move on to attackers or all-rounders? What would you rather talk about next? I think we got all of our... Oh, and supporters. Attackers, all-rounders, and supporters here. We got all right, the chat wants to do all-rounders. All-rounders might be our most controversial category, because I think all-rounders really run the gamut of like things that people think are good and are not good, in my opinion, and things that people think are bad and are actually decent. So let's do all-rounders here, because this could be pretty fun. Okay. All right. Okay. Charizard. Underrated. I think the newest buffs are good for Charizard, and I still think Charizard is pretty underrated right now. Argue with me. I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Am I off? Are most people feeling that Char's pretty decent right now? I think it's pretty underrated, honestly. You think Charizard is overrated? Interesting. We got JC Vibe saying B. Over. Dang. Interesting. Ooh, a lot of people... Now, this is where it's interesting, because I think under... Some people think over, and a lot of people are saying B. I'm going to move this to our B tier then, because this feels like it's hard to exactly pin down where people think this is. I think it's probably a little underrated. We got someone in the chat, some people in the chat saying overrated. So let's go ahead and leave this one in B for now. Okay, Lucario, underrated. It's underrated. It has the lowest win rate right now. It is not the worst Pokemon in this game. People forgot how to play this Pokemon. It is not underrated. It is not underrated. I'm arguing with myself. It's not underrated. It is really good still. Really good still. I think it's underrated for sure. Like, for sure, underrated Pokemon. I think people just kind of forgot how to play this thing, for sure. Garchomp. Garchomp's a hard one, because I think Garchomp's a bit underrated. It used to be bad, and I think people have kind of never forgotten that it was bad. I honestly think Chomp's underrated here. We have a lot of in the chat agreeing with me too. Yeah, I think Garchomp's actually pretty underrated. So what we're ranking right now, if for people just joining us, these are whether a Pokemon is overrated, underrated, or the community kind of views it right in line with what it is. I actually think it's pretty underrated, you know? You think it's fine? People don't think it's bad anymore? I think a lot of people still act like Garchomp is trolling. I think they still act like Garchomp is trolling to me. But we'll see. Okay, what do we do about Zarina? I want to talk about Zarina. I think Zarina is overrated. We all know it's bad. Hear me out. We all know it's bad. I think it's overrated. I think we're not even recognizing how bad it is. I think it's overrated. But no one really plays her, to be fair. So I could put it down in the B tier. Like, people have fallen off this hard. However, I heard that this was in a tournament recently in Japan, I think, and it did well. But I think Zarina is not doing well at all. Like, really poorly. Let's see. Machamp. I think Machamp is probably accurately rated. I don't think people have anything bad to say about Machamp. Its Unite move's really good. Everyone kind of sees Machamp's value. I think it's pretty reasonable, right? I think it's a reasonable place to put Machamp. B. Seems like a fair place. Dragonite is underrated? It might be underrated. I think Dragonite's probably underrated. Man. I don't think people really give Dragonite much credit at all. And I think there's some good stuff with it. I see in the chat Outrage. Outrage actually has some good use right now, and it's getting some buffs. I think it's definitely not a top tier Pokemon, but I do think people underrate Dragonite. I don't think it's as bad as people think. Let's see. T-Tar. I mean, yeah. I can't. I mean, T-Tar's overrated without question. It's way overrated. This Pokemon is like supremely overrated for sure. It's really, really high up there. It's like in my mind, I'm like, this is close to a god tier overrated for me right now. It's not that you can't do well with it. All of these Pokemon have value inside the game, right? It's just, man, it used to be so much better, and now you have to get to level 9 on this thing, and it's just such a struggle. I just feel like it's rough right now. It's really rough. Zacian, I think, is B tier. I mean, what is there to say about Zacian? Everyone knows it's broken. So I don't think anyone. Every once in a while, you have someone go, "Actually, it's not bad. It's like actually kind of bad." Like we get it. It's busted. Everyone knows it's busted. So, all right. Here's a weird one. Azumarill. This is a controversial take right here. All right. Are you ready to hear something controversial? Controversial. I actually think it's underrated. I do. I think it's underrated. Yeah. A lot of the chat's saying underrated too. I think it's actually underrated. Now, that being said, when I say something's underrated, it doesn't mean that I don't think it could use some buffs or something like that, right? But I really do think this is an underrated Pokemon. It's not great, but it probably gets a little more hate than it deserves. And it's got some new buffs coming. I think they're well deserved. But yeah, I would say underrated. Okay. Here's the thing. I think this is a top tier. This next one, this might be one of the most underrated Pokemon in the game. And that's Buzzwole. Fight me. Like, what do we... I honestly think this thing is super underrated. I just think people are like not great at playing it. But I honestly think Buzzwole is very underrated. It's like really hard to do well with. But if you play this Pokemon well, it's so good. It's so good. It's like, it's up there for me as a D tier. It's up there for me as a D tier underrated Pokemon. I think it's very good. Okay. Let's see. Aegislash. I'll be honest, I keep skipping Aegislash. I have no clue where to put this Pokemon. It's probably underrated. But not that much. Like, I think it's underrated. My gut says underrated. Right? Yeah, a lot of chat saying underrated. Some B. And here's the thing. I don't think it's overrated at all. At all. I don't think it's overrated at all. It's hard to play well. You don't see it a lot. I would say it's probably underrated, if anything. It could be B as well. But I think it would be underrated. You never see anyone play this thing anymore. What's its pick rate? Good question. I don't know if this is gonna... I don't know if I have this set up where you guys can actually see it. I would assume its pick rate's like in the gutter. It's 3%. It's very low. It's a very low pick rate. So I would say this Pokemon is pretty underrated. I would say. Let's see. Scissor, I would say Scissor is overrated. I don't think Scissor is as good as people think. I think there is some good stuff it can do, especially if it has a, support Pokemon with it that can heal it, and if it goes into the right composition. However, if it goes into that, it's great. It's super great. But most of the time, you're running into things that really don't play well for Scissor at all. Fun Pokemon to play, but I would say this Pokemon is overrated. It's, I think it still needs some love. I would say it still needs some love. Let's see. Okay, we now have Urshifus. We actually have both Urshifus right here. I would say Water Bear, B tier, meaning rated very well by the community. And I think that the Dark Bear, the single strike build, I think is slightly underrated, I would say. Slightly underrated. Let me see if I can fix this real quick to make it just a little better for everybody. There we go. Yeah, I would say Dark Bear is slightly underrated. And I think the big thing that happened to Dark Bear is Water Bear just got so good that everyone kind of fell off this build, but it's still insane secure. You don't see it much anymore. I think it's still pretty good. That's where I would put those two Pokemon here. And that moves us away from our all-rounders. Now, do we want to do supporters or do we want to do attackers? Attackers is our biggest category. Let's save that for last here. So we're going to go ahead and do our supporters right now. Mime, underrated. Still good. I recognize that they nerfed it, so people ran away from it. I get it. I think Mime is still a good Pokemon, and it is definitely underrated inside the game. It was so broken that I think people, when it got nerfed, this is what happens. We all remember this with Duraludon. Duraludon was the most broken thing ever. It got nerfed, and then all of a sudden people stopped playing it. And I think they just didn't even realize it was still really good. So, underrated, I would say, for Mr. Mime. We might start hurting some feelings with some of these supporters right here. Because a lot of these are good, but maybe a little overrated. I'm trying to think of where to put it. I think Eldegoss is really good. I guess I gotta say Eldegoss is B. Because I was gonna say slightly overrated. But honestly, I think people recognize it's really good. It's just a good Pokemon. Yeah. Some people could say even underrated. I could see that too. It's really good. If you don't know LD's good, it's really good. And I think a lot of people think it's good. So I can't really mess with that too much. Clefable? I'm wondering, I would say Clefable might be a little underrated. I think it might be a little underrated. Its heal's great. Gravity is awesome. Follow Me is fantastic. I think Clefable is probably underrated, honestly. It's not like grossly underrated. Everyone knows it's a good healer, but I think it might be a little underrated. I would say so. Wiggly, also probably underrated. Maybe one of the most underrated Pokemon in the game in some ways, but to be fair, it's a tank that just gets beat out by other tanks. It's probably one of the dark horse, like, tank Pokemon inside the game, though. You think Wiggly's overrated, says Midnight Swamp. Interesting. I think it's underrated. I do. I don't see anybody running Wiggly, really. I think it's definitely underrated for me. Let's see. Our next supporter, Blissey. I mean, I still think it's really good. Blissey maybe teeters into overrated, maybe, but everyone knows it's really good. Like, you can't say Blissey's not good. Its Unite's insane. Its healing is amazing. Like, Blissey is very good. It's just very, very good. Okay. All right. Maybe this is the most controversial one on the supporters. Sableye a little overrated right now? I don't know. It's crazy, but I think it might be a little overrated, honestly. I do. I know it's really good, but sometimes I feel like you have to recognize that it's such a bizarre category of Pokemon, and it really does not always do enough for the team. There are other times where it's just an absolute monster, but I think it's probably a little overrated at this point. I like it. I do think it's good, but I actually think it might be a little overrated, especially in solo queue. Yeah, Hoopa I think is just probably really good. I don't know. I think Hoopa's really good. I would like to say, you know what? Maybe even Hoopa's saying under, B or under, B or under. I think a lot of people think it's good, but a lot of people are saying under here. D tier. Whoa, people don't see the value. Really? All right. I'm gonna put it into the underrated then. That's interesting. I think Hoopa's great. So my brain thinks this Pokemon's like pretty accurately ranked, but it sounds like the chat's all saying, yeah, this Pokemon is actually a little better than people give it credit for. That makes sense. Underrated but hard to play. I could see that. Comfey. Comfey is simultaneously underrated and way overrated. But it's completely busted. And honestly, it's really hard, guys. This thing is still so good. It's like so good. I have no idea where to put this. I'm going to put it B tier. I would like to put it overrated, underrated. But the issue with Comfey is I still think it's nuts. Like, no matter how you look at it, like, you could say it's slightly overrated, but I don't know. I still think this Pokemon is incredibly good. And then you could say it's underrated in some ways, but everyone knows it's great. I don't know. I think it's B. I have to leave it B because I think it's that good. Let's see. Our attackers are coming up next. Here we go. Our attackers. Venusaur. Overrated? Venusaur might be overrated. It's solid. I don't think it's that great. Sometimes it's really good. People are saying underrated. Ooh. Underrated. Really? Everyone's saying underrated. All right, I'm being outvoted here. I'll move this down to the underrated category. I think Venusaur is actually a little overrated. I do. I don't think it performs as well as you would like, but I will acquiesce to the chat. They are saying this thing is underrated, and I will go with them. I think it's not, but I'm happy to be outvoted for this one. Gardevoir, I think B tier. I think everyone thinks Guard's pretty good. I don't know. I think Guard's like a pretty common, like, good Pokemon. I don't think anyone thinks it's bad or anything like that. I don't think anyone thinks it's like way too good or something. I think Guard's viewed as a pretty good Pokemon, right? Let's see. Next, Greninja. Overrated. Not God tier, but overrated. I think Greninja... The chat's saying God tier right away. I think Greninja's overrated. I think it's an overrated Pokemon inside the game. For sure. Everyone's saying God tier. I don't know. You think it's God tier overrated? Holy, I didn't think it would be Greninja. I really didn't think it would be Greninja. Okay, maybe. I'll consider it. I'm not throwing it in God tier now. We're not friggin' Norse around here. We don't have tons of gods that we throw up there. We get to pick one god. All right. Okay. A lot of people think God tier. Interesting. It is a good contender. I agree. It's a good contender for the God tier right here. King Saint saying Gardevoir underrated. Interesting. I don't know. I think a lot of people like it a lot. Cinderace. I would say Cinderace is overrated. I don't know. The buffs were good. I think maybe it's closer to B. Some people think B tier. Some people think underrated. B, actually. B. We have a lot of votes for B. Okay, B with the buffs. I could agree to B with the buffs. Before the buffs, I would say it was overrated, but I could agree to B with the buffs. Okay. All right, let's see. Cram, a criminally underrated Pokemon. I think Craminent. I think Craminent. I think Cramorant. Okay. I think Cramorant is very, very underrated. Very underrated. I think it's very, very good. And I just think nobody plays it. I think the devs even try to get you to stop playing it by nerfing it all the time. I think Cramorant is one of the best Pokemon in the game that people don't play, for sure. Ooh! You guys ready for this one? Pikachu. Underrated. I actually think very underrated. I think Pikachu's a pretty underrated Pokemon. Pretty good, actually. And I think a lot of people just don't even realize how good this Pokemon is. I think an underrated choice for sure. I think Pikachu is not amazing, but actually a really decent support attacker. But that's why it's underrated, I think. Because its role doesn't feel as clearly defined. Like Greninja, Cinderace, Elite, they're carries. Pikachu really isn't that. You can carry with it sometimes, but it really is a supporter. Alola Ninetales is really good, and I think everyone has like seen the buffs and said, yes, this is really good right now. I think Alola Ninetales is B. It's not overrated. It's really good. And everyone goes, wow, not what great buffs. I love this thing. So I think it's totally B tier right now. Perfect rating by the community. We know that it's very good. You think Pika's overrated? Interesting, Shroud. Sylveon. I would say Sylveon is probably a little underrated. I think it is a little underrated. People know it's good, but I think it's like the forgotten Eevee. I think, yeah, low-key underrated, I think. I think it's the one that everyone's like forgotten about. You know, we know all of them, but people use it lots. Maybe they do. Let's take a look at the pick rate. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Let's look at our pick rate right now. Not that this decides everything, but its pick rate is 7%. It's kind of right in here with some like Lucario, Blissey, Machamp, Char. I don't know. Something about this Pokemon to me just feels like people sleep on it a little bit. And it's just because the other Eevees are kind of in the spotlight more. I would say it's a little underrated for me. But I like it. I like it a lot. And I think people don't think it's bad or anything. It's a little underrated. Let's do the other Eevees while we're here. Espeon, probably B. I don't see it as much since the nerfs, but it's still really good. Overrated? I don't know, guys. You think overrated? Really? Overrated after the nerfs? I don't know. I think it's still good. I could be wrong here, but I think it's still good. Glaceon, I think, is B without question. Everyone knows it's broken. B with the buffs, for sure. It's like, yeah, we all know it's B. It's so good. Decidueye. Decidueye is a weird one. Decidueye is simultaneously underrated and overrated. I would say it leans closer to underrated, but this is one of the harder ones to rank because it's so punishable, but you can really pop off with it. You can't put it in the memorial tier. Whoops, sorry, microphone. Even though it's named after it. I honestly am closer to underrated than anything with Decidueye. I'm going to say it's underrated. However, I think Razor Leaf is overrated. I do. It's so hard to play without a team. But Spirit Shackle, I do think is probably underrated. Yeah. Duraludon, criminally underrated Pokemon. Probably going to go into our Decidueye Memorial tier. I think it is so underrated. It's unbelievable. It's so good. And it has, every week its win rate's good. And nobody plays this thing. It's just like D for Dura. I think Duraludon is very, very, very underrated. Very underrated. Let's see. Delphox. B. Yeah. B. Maybe even slightly overrated since the nerfs. They were small. I think B. It's still good. Like, it's still a really good Pokemon. It definitely got hurt a little bit from its nerfs, but I still think it's like, it's one of the better mages in the game, and it's pretty self-sustaining. Its Unite move is insane. Mew. Mew. Solo? I think Mew's probably underrated because it's so, since the nerfs, it's so much more difficult to do well with. However, if you're good with it, it's brutal. It's so brutal. I'm going to say underrated. I think it's still really good. Underrated. You guys want to see the pick rate? Okay, let's find out. Mew's a low pick rate. 4% feels pretty underrated to me. And its win rate's over 50. That's without question underrated by the community. Without question. We are not Otter. Well, that's true. That's true. There are some players that are cracked on this. I think Dragapult underrated. I think Dragapult's actually better than people give it credit for. I think it's actually underrated Pokemon. It's not amazing, but I think it feels a little forgotten to me. Dragapult feels a little forgotten. There are just some releases that come out and you just think, I don't see people play it that much, and I actually think it's pretty good. It just kind of, its play style I don't think is maybe as flashy as certain other Pokemon, but I think it's underrated for sure. Let's take a look. Our final one, Chandelure. I would say Chandelure is probably B. I think a lot of people think Chandelure was one of those releases that came out and everyone was like, this is good. Like, that's what I felt like with Chandelure. Everyone's like, yeah, this is good. I don't think anyone thought it was horrible. There were some people who thought it was too squishy, but in general, it's a mage that does a lot of damage. And I think everyone thinks it's pretty good. All right, here we go. So those are all of our Pokemon right now. We're going to move some things to the Decidueye Memorial tier and one Pokemon to our overrated God tier for the week. For the Decidueye Memorial tier, and I'll have the chat argue with me, I think Greedent is a constantly underrated Pokemon. I think it's an easy choice for one of the most underrated in the game. I also think Duraludon is a super, super, super underrated Pokemon. I believe that Cramorant is one of the most slept on things inside of Pokemon Unite for sure. Outside of that, ooh, a lot of the chat's saying Mew. Ooh, Mime too. Interesting. Mime is pretty underrated right now. You're right. I kind of think Mime maybe is in there. Interesting. Wiggly? Ooh, Wiggly's pretty underrated. Lucario for sure. Do you think that the community really thinks Lucario is that bad? Do they think Lucario is that bad? That's the thing that I'm kind of like, I don't think they think it's that bad. Crustle, definitely. The only problem with Crustle is I think it does struggle sometimes. That's the big thing. I think it does struggle. I would say, ooh, Mamo. Mamo is not a bad one. I think, oh, Buzz. Wow. Buzz really, honestly, you might be right. Buzz might be one of the most underrated Pokemon. I do think Buzz is quite underrated. It is really underrated, and it's hard to win with, but once you, if you see a good Buzz player, they're insane. I'm going to put Buzz down there as well. So we have two attackers, not that we need to round it out in any way, but we have two attackers, we have an all-rounder, we have a defender here. If there was a speedster to go down, it would probably be Talon. But I'm not in love with Talon even being there. I don't think it's that underrated, honestly. And Absol's like, I don't think it's that underrated. We don't need a speedster down there. Anyone else? Maybe Mime. Maybe Wiggly. This song's too intense for me. Zera? I don't think it's that underrated. Sword, maybe. Sword, maybe, honestly. Snorlax, is that underrated? Jeez. I can't see a reality where Snorlax is that underrated. I think I'm going to leave this where it is. I'm going to leave this for the underrated tier for now. For the Decidueye Memorial tier for underrated Pokemon. And now we have to choose our God tier Pokemon. We have, in the running, Gengar, Goodra, Scizor, Tyranitar, Sableye, and Greninja. I already see where the chat is voting heavily. Man, it's hard to even argue it. Here's the thing. I might even argue hardest for T-Tar. I'm not going to lie. But the chat is overwhelmingly saying it's Greninja. Like, it's overwhelming. I was thinking T-Tar for the most part. I do think Scizor is actually pretty overrated. I do. But I mean, it's interesting to see. I mean, the votes are, if you look at the chat, it's like tons of Greninja, tons of Greninja. I lean more heavily towards T-Tar, but Greninja does feel like a pretty overrated Pokemon. And I think the player base that plays Greninja is absolutely insane. Everyone thinks they're a ninja. That's something I talk about all the time. I'll leave it. I'll leave it there. I'll do it. I agree with you that it is a pretty overrated Pokemon sometimes, and the people who play it believe they are ninjas, and they are not ninjas. So I will leave it as our God tier choice. This has been our overrated, underrated tier list. I hope you enjoyed. I'm not going to mix things around because I just think it would be so insanely confusing at this point to start mixing it around. Thank you all. Thanks for being here live. If you were here live, please let everybody know in the comments. I would love to hear what people think in the comments about this. Obviously, some things were moved around due to the chat. Do you agree with the chat? Do you not agree with the chat? Let me know. Love you all, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye, everybody. We did it.